The words sliced through me sharper than any blade. Your presence would bring down the caliber of attendees. I stood frozen, gripping the polished brass handle of Preston Hawthorne's office door, my knuckles whitening as if I could squeeze the humiliation out of existence. Preston, reclining comfortably in his Italian leather chair, steepled his fingers and wore that smug, insincere expression I'd come to know far too well. The corner of his mouth twitched upward in false sympathy as his cold gaze traveled from my sensible navy blazer to the practical black pumps I'd worn countless times before. I just don't believe you're executive material, Audrey, he continued smoothly, just loud enough for the surrounding cubicles to catch every word. The Caldwell Cove Private Resort is extremely exclusive. Our clients expect a certain level of polish and sophistication. His eyes lingered disapprovingly on my modest jewelry and conservative appearance. You understand, of course. I forced my breathing to remain steady even though my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I could feel the shift in energy across the open plan office behind me. The tapping of keyboards had slowed. Conversations had abruptly stopped mid-sentence. I knew they were listening. I always knew. The invisible wall had just become concrete. I understand, I said evenly, my voice betraying none of the raw fury surging through me. I stood straighter, keeping the steel of my dignity intact. Thank you for the clarification. I walked away, back through the labyrinth of glass partitions and hushed whispers, chin held high as my father had taught me long ago. Never let them see you break. Never let them taste blood. The moment I reached my desk, my trembling fingers slowly unclenched. The soft click of my chair felt unnaturally loud in the silence that followed. I stared blankly at the Open Apex Technologies project file on my screen. I had landed that account. I had delivered every milestone early. I had outperformed every single metric. And still, Preston had deemed me unworthy. The irony was suffocating. I knew that resort better than any of them could ever dream. I knew the polished teak floors, the delicate hand-woven fabrics, the private meditation pavilion that had been my own design concept during college. I had practically grown up at Caldwell Cove, folding towels beside the staff at 7 years old, learning how to set an elegant dinner table at 10, watching my father build his empire brick by brick. Yet I had chosen this. I had chosen to work under Preston's thumb at Brighton and Company, marketing group, rejecting my family name and fortune to prove myself on merit alone. And now this man, this mediocre fraud wrapped in overpriced tailoring, had told me I didn't belong at my own family's legacy. My phone sat quietly on my desk. I stared at it for a long, bitter moment. The urge to smash it into pieces was overwhelming. Instead, I reached for it with deliberate calm. My thumb hovered over the contact, labeled Simply Dad. I hadn't called him in months. I had sworn I wouldn't, but this time was different. I took a slow breath and dialed. The line rang twice. His deep, familiar voice answered casually, Audrey. I clenched my jaw to keep the emotion from cracking through. Hi, Dad, I exhaled slowly. We need to talk about the company retreat at Caldwell Cove next week. I have a favor to ask. There was a pause. I imagined him pacing the terrace of our private estate, the sound of waves crashing against the shore behind him. Interesting timing, he said finally, a sharp edge of curiosity cutting into his tone. Let's talk. I smiled faintly for the first time that day. I had just made my decision. 3 years earlier, when I first walked into Brighton and Company as just another applicant with an MBA and an iron determination, I had been nobody and I wanted it that way. My father, Harrison Caldwell, had stood on the marble steps of our family estate that morning, confusion softening his usually steely expression. You know you don't have to do this, Audrey, he had said quietly as I loaded 2 battered suitcases into my aging Honda Civic. You have a place at Caldwell Hospitality, a vice president title tomorrow if you want it. I had smiled and shaken my head, gripping the car door. I have to know I earned it, Dad. I have to know who's real and who's not. He had nodded slowly, pride flickering behind his concern. Then go build your own path. And so I had. My apartment, a modest one-bedroom unit, tucked into the unglamorous outskirts of Newport Beach, smelled faintly of old wood and ocean air. My car had more dents than shine. My work wardrobe consisted of carefully chosen basics: tailored slacks, crisp white shirts, low-heeled pumps. No designer logos, no extravagant jewelry, just function. It wasn't hardship. It was freedom. But Preston Hawthorne hadn't seen it that way. The moment I stepped into Brighton and Company, I could feel his gaze. Calculating. Dismissive. I wasn't flashy enough. I didn't wear the right labels, didn't frequent expensive restaurants where deals were accidentally brokered over dry martinis. To Preston, I was safe to ignore, safe to exploit. The first year, I worked tirelessly, staying long past midnight, volunteering for every project no one else wanted. My reward? Being passed over for promotions I had clearly earned. Preston had a talent for subtle sabotage. My name conveniently forgotten on presentations. My strategy proposals reassigned at the last minute to junior male colleagues from his inner circle. I still remember the sting of watching Tyler and Jason deliver my fully built pitch deck to the Mitchell Sports drink team, barely even understanding the key talking points. I had sat there in the back row of the conference room, expression neutral, heart quietly fracturing. Every coincidence chipped away at my patience. Every offhand comment about my basic style or lack of executive polish was like sandpaper on raw skin. But I endured. Not for them. For me. I know who I am, I whispered to myself one night at 2 a.m., staring at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror of my tiny apartment. They don't get to define my worth. By the second year, I started winning clients despite Preston's best efforts to box me into low-profile accounts. The Apex Technologies campaign had been my breakthrough. I had crafted a groundbreaking digital transformation proposal, integrating predictive AI with traditional marketing models. It had impressed the client so much that they requested I personally lead the account, a first for someone at my level. Preston's reaction had been swift and predictable. "You'll need support," he had said with that fake smile of his. "I'm assigning Tyler and Jason to co-manage it. Big accounts require big teamwork." It wasn't support. It was insurance. Split the credit if it succeeded. Assign blame to me if it failed. Still, I delivered. The internal email from Margot Evans, the new VP of Client Relations, had been the first real validation I had received in months. "Can you drop by at 4? I want to discuss your thinking on Apex." Brilliant work. Emmy. For 30 golden minutes in her office, we had discussed real ideas without politics, without posturing. I had walked back to my desk that day feeling something dangerous, hope, but it hadn't lasted long. Preston noticed instantly. His eyes had narrowed as Margot praised my insights. His grip on his empire and on me had slipped ever so slightly. I had known then, even as I sat typing follow-up notes, that the backlash would be brutal. I wasn't wrong. When the company-wide email about the upcoming executive retreat at Caldwell Cove landed in my inbox 2 weeks later, my name was missing. Omitted, despite my role leading the highest profile account Brighton and Company had landed that quarter. That omission had been deliberate. And now, 3 years after I first walked through those glass doors, it had all come full circle. I stared out at the late afternoon haze beyond my office window, the horizon blurring into soft gold. "Enough," I whispered. It was time to stop hiding. Time to remind Preston Hawthorne and the world exactly whose name was carved into the foundation stone of Caldwell Cove Private Resort. The apartment felt smaller than usual that night, as though the walls had shifted, closing in around me with the weight of humiliation. I kicked off my plain black pumps and let them tumble noisily to the floor. My uninspired navy blazer followed, draped unceremoniously over the back of a worn dining chair. The same chair I had bought secondhand during graduate school. I poured myself 2 fingers of the 30-year-old Macallan my father had given me last Christmas, the one luxury I allowed myself in private. The amber liquid burned smoothly down my throat, chasing away the bitter taste of Preston's words. The apartment was silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the rhythmic crash of waves from the nearby shoreline. I stared out the window toward the Pacific, a horizon I had once dreamed represented endless opportunity. Tonight it mocked me. The clock on the wall read 9:31 p.m. My phone lay untouched on the kitchen counter, screen dark. I hadn't called my father in months, determined to maintain distance, to prove that I could do this on my own, without his shadow looming over my choices. I stared at it, the internal war raging. Finally, I picked it up with deliberate calm, scrolled to the contact labeled Dad. My thumb hovered for only a moment before I pressed call. 2 rings. Audrey. His voice was warm, familiar, with that unmistakable edge of control and calculation that had built an empire from nothing. I swallowed hard. My words came out quieter than I intended. Hi, Dad. I hesitated, suddenly unsure. We need to talk about the company retreat at Caldwell Cove next week. I have a favor to ask. There was a long pause. I imagined him standing on the terrace of our family's estate, dark suit jacket over one shoulder, staring out at the same vast ocean I now faced alone. The soft crash of waves echoed faintly through the line. Interesting timing, he said at last, his tone shifting from casual to sharp. You've avoided mixing work and family for 3 years. What changed? I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply before I answered. I've tried to do this my way, on my terms. I still want that, but I've been pushed too far. Another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. I see. His voice softened slightly. What do you need? I smiled, faintly despite myself. The presidential villa, and Carlos needs to know I'm coming. But I don't want you to interfere directly. No phone calls. No warnings. Let me handle the reveal my way. There was silence again, then a deep, satisfied chuckle. The presidential villa? You always did have impeccable taste. That's a $25,000 per night booking, you know. Precisely. I heard the rustle of papers, the clicking of a keyboard on his end. You realize you could have had this company at 25, Audrey. I offered. I know. And yet here we are, he sighed heavily. Fine. Carlos will prepare everything to your specifications. You have my word. Relief washed over me. Thank you, Dad. His voice warmed again with quiet pride. You're finally playing to win, sweetheart. About time. Call me after your all-hands meeting tomorrow. We'll finalize the arrangements. Will do. I ended the call and stared out at the dark ocean once more, the weight in my chest lightening for the first time all day. The familiar rhythm of waves calmed me. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of ego. It was about restoring my dignity on my terms at my family's resort. I drained the last sip of whiskey and whispered to the empty room, "Let the games begin." Tuesday morning greeted me with cruel precision. I was seated at my desk by 7:30 a.m., an hour before most of my colleagues even began drifting in. The building's tall windows framed the Newport Beach skyline under a pale, washed-out sky. At exactly 7:55 a.m., my phone vibrated across the desk. A simple text from Dad, jet-fueled and waiting. Presidential villa confirmed. Carlos sends his regards. I smiled slightly, allowing myself the smallest moment of satisfaction. But the day ahead belonged to the farce I had lived for 3 years, the carefully choreographed circus of Brighton and Company. By 9:30 a.m., the office buzzed with the usual caffeine-fueled urgency. I spotted Preston in his usual stance at the center of the open floor, surrounded by Tyler, Jason, and the rest of his chosen circle. His voice carried easily across the partition space. Snorkeling first or sailing? Preston mused dramatically, waving a glossy travel brochure from Caldwell Cove Resort. Maybe I'll do both. Tough life. He paused deliberately as I walked past. I'll wait. Audrey, you won't be there to worry about it. The snickers from the group were soft but unmistakable. I kept walking, chin lifted, steps measured. My email inbox exploded by midday. The subject lines read like weapons. Urgent. Henderson campaign alternate concepts needed by Friday re. Wilson holiday campaign. Request for early draft FWD. Additional edits to Mitchell presentation deck for additional projects. All with conflicting deadlines. All due just after the retreat ended. The intent was transparent. Preston was burying me in busy work to ensure I stayed behind, silent and overworked. I opened each file methodically, fingers calm even as anger simmered beneath the surface. My father had taught me long ago, never let emotion dictate your strategy. Never react until the moment to strike arrived. The only disappointment came from Margot. After weeks of professional camaraderie, she had begun to distance herself in subtle ways. I had caught her twice turning down side corridors to avoid passing me. She stopped replying directly to my emails. In meetings, she addressed her comments to others, even when responding to my suggestions. Finally, Thursday afternoon, I knocked on her office door, Apex project file in hand. Not a good time, Audrey, she said briskly without looking up from her computer screen. Send me an email. I hesitated, only briefly. I thought you wanted to be directly involved in the Apex account. She finally looked up, expression unreadable. Priorities have shifted. Preston feels the account needs more executive oversight. I absorbed the blow, quietly. The message was clear. Aligning herself with the excluded employee offered no upward benefit. Margot had chosen survival over integrity. I nodded once. I see. I walked back to my desk under the cold fluorescent lights. No one met my eyes as I passed. The invisible wall had returned, thicker than ever. I stared out the window at the slow-rolling fog over the Pacific. The pieces were all moving exactly as I had predicted. At 5:42 p.m., I received the final text I had been waiting for. Antonio, all preparations complete. Staff briefed. Looking forward to your arrival. Revenge is best served with ocean views. I allowed myself one deep breath. The trap was set. They had written the script, but I was about to change the ending. I closed my laptop, rose from my chair, and whispered to the empty office, tomorrow. Friday evening passed in a blur of quiet preparation. My suitcase stood by the door, not the battered black roller I normally traveled with, but a discreet, beautifully crafted leather set that had belonged to my mother. Simple, timeless, perfect. The soft chime of an encrypted email interrupted my thoughts. Attached were dozens of high-resolution photographs of the recently renovated presidential villa at Caldwell Cove, a project I had personally contributed design input to during my final year at Stanford. I stared at the images, absorbing every detail. The soaring floor-to-ceiling windows, the infinity pool melting into the ocean horizon, the signature blend of indigenous woodwork and cutting-edge architecture. Every detail had been arranged exactly as I envisioned, not for comfort, but for theater. At 6:15 a.m. on Saturday, I arrived at the private executive airstrip just outside Los Angeles. The sleek silhouette of the Caldwell jet gleamed under the early morning sun. A familiar figure waited at the bottom of the stairs. "Welcome aboard, Miss Caldwell." Diane greeted me warmly. Diane had been with our family for over 15 years. Her professional smile softened as I approached. "It's wonderful to see you again." I smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Diane. How's your daughter doing at UCLA?" Her face brightened. "Thriving. I can't believe you remembered." "Of course I did. Tell her I'm proud of her." As I settled into the wide leather seat, I felt something I hadn't known in years: anticipation without dread. For once, I wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. The 3-hour flight passed peacefully. Instead of my usual business uniform, I wore a simple white linen shift dress paired with understated gold sandals and my mother's sapphire pendant, the exact shade of Caldwell Cove's signature blue. Elegant but not flashy, unmistakably belonging. The jet touched down smoothly on the island's private landing strip at exactly 10:02 a.m. The Caribbean sun was already high, casting sharp shadows across the manicured grounds. Antonio Ramirez stood waiting at the bottom of the steps, arms crossed, wearing his customary tailored resort whites. His broad smile broke into genuine warmth as I descended. "Little Audrey Caldwell," he said fondly, before stepping back and offering me his arm. "Though you are not so little anymore. Your father tells me you've become quite the marketing genius." I laughed softly. Hardly a genius, just underestimated a powerful combination. He led me toward the waiting golf cart. "Tell me exactly how you want this to unfold." I handed him a folded photo of Preston. "This man is the one to watch. I want it subtle, Antonio. No drama. No one loses a job. This isn't about destruction. It's about recalibration." Antonio nodded, a mischievous sparkle dancing in his eyes. "Understood. Though your father sounded quite disappointed when I explained he couldn't have this Preston accidentally lose his luggage in the ocean." We shared a knowing laugh. By 1:30 p.m., I was in place, concealed just behind the extravagant native floral arrangement in the grand lobby. I had the perfect sight line of the entrance. Carlos, always the professional, stood at the reception desk calmly reviewing the arrival documents. At precisely 2:07 p.m., the double-glass doors swung open. The Brighton and Company entourage streamed inside. Sun hats, sunglasses, and loud laughter filled the air as they gazed around, visibly awestruck by the soaring wooden beams and panoramic ocean views. Preston strutted forward like a man stepping onto a personal stage, expensive tropical shirt still creased from its packaging. He turned, dramatically addressing the group. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is what true luxury looks like," he announced grandly. From behind the foliage, I couldn't help but smile. Preston had no idea, but the stage was no longer his. Tomorrow would belong to me. The lobby fell into an expectant hush as Antonio stepped forward, clipboard in hand, cutting an impressive figure of calm authority. "Welcome to Caldwell Cove Private Resort," he announced warmly. "I am Antonio Ramirez, General Manager. We're delighted to have Brighton and Company Marketing Group as our guests." Preston surged ahead, confidently, extending his hand. "Preston Hawthorne, President of Brighton and Company. I believe my assistant confirmed our arrangements for the executive Ocean Villas." Antonio accepted the handshake with polite indifference. "Indeed, Mr. Hawthorne. However, there has been a change." Preston blinked, his confident facade cracking ever so slightly. "A change?" Antonio scanned the room dramatically, eyes passing over every stunned face before resting on me. "If you'll excuse me, I must first greet our primary guest, Miss Caldwell." I stepped slowly from behind the lush floral arrangement. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if time itself held its breath. Preston's eyes widened, his jaw slackening as recognition dawned painfully. His skin drained of color, leaving him ghostly pale against his freshly tanned face. I walked forward, calm, composed, my white linen dress fluttering softly with each step. The sapphire pendant at my throat caught the sunlight and refracted it like a tiny flame. Antonio smiled broadly as he embraced me. "Welcome home, Miss Caldwell. Your father called personally to ensure everything was prepared to your exact specifications." The silence that followed was absolute. The stunned expressions around the room were deliciously familiar. The same colleagues who had avoided my gaze all week now scrambled to process what they were witnessing. The woman they had dismissed as basic and unworthy was the daughter of Harrison Caldwell, the man whose name adorned every wall and whose legacy built this empire. "Thank you, Antonio," I replied, my voice clear and even. "It's wonderful to be home." Preston stumbled backward, colliding clumsily with the polished reception desk. A staff member instinctively reached out to steady him as he gripped the marble edge for balance. You're Caldwell," he whispered hoarsely. I turned to him with the faintest smile, every inch of me the poised executive he had refused to acknowledge for 3 years. "Hello, Preston." Surprise. I let the word hang in the charged air. The other Brighton team members stood frozen in disbelief, unsure whether to move, speak, or simply vanish. Antonio, consummate professional as always, continued without missing a beat. "Everyone, please follow me to the presidential villa that Miss Caldwell has graciously reserved for your company's exclusive use." Gasps rippled through the group. Murmurs erupted like a slow wave. The presidential villa. Margot finally managed to speak, her voice cracking slightly. "Yes," Antonio confirmed. "Our crown jewel, $25,000 per night. Though, of course, there is no charge for Miss Caldwell or her guests." As the team filed toward the waiting fleet of luxury golf carts, I fell into step beside Preston, who walked as if in a daze, shoulders hunched inward as though trying to make himself invisible. I lowered my voice, so only he could hear. "Don't worry, Preston. I wouldn't dream of bringing down the caliber of attendees. After all, this is what true luxury looks like." The look on his face, shock, disbelief, and finally the bitter sting of humiliation, was worth every agonizing slight I had endured. The procession out of the grand lobby felt surreal. Antonio and I walked effortlessly ahead while the Brighton team trailed behind, wide-eyed and whispering. I caught Jason tripping over his own feet, too distracted by staring at me to watch where he was walking. Tyler leaned urgently toward Margot, whispering furiously, as if trying to make sense of the impossible. Preston shuffled along behind them, breathing heavy, reduced to a shadow of the man who had once controlled my career so casually. We emerged into the golden afternoon light. The golf carts stood ready, spotless and gleaming like sentinels awaiting their riders. "Your cart is up front with me, Miss Caldwell," Antonio offered smoothly, gesturing to the lead vehicle. I slid gracefully into the passenger seat. Preston instinctively moved forward, then froze mid-step as realization hit. The invitation had not been for him. He retreated awkwardly, head bowed, as Antonio guided me forward. As the convoy wound through the manicured tropical landscape, past private groves and hidden beaches, I sat back against the cool leather seat and allowed myself the smallest smile of satisfaction. For the first time in 3 years, I was exactly where I belonged. The convoy of golf carts curved gracefully along the winding coastal road, each bend revealing glimpses of aquamarine waves crashing gently against white sand coves. I knew every palm tree, every flowering hibiscus, every carved stone that marked the path. I had helped plan this resort as a teenager. They were walking through my legacy, even if they didn't know it yet. As we approached the presidential villa, the structure emerged like a vision from a dream. Perched dramatically along the cliffside, 3 sides of the villa opened to endless ocean views. 6 separate bedroom suites, an infinity pool that spilled into the horizon, and private terraces with handcrafted furniture awaited them. The Brighton staff gasped audibly as the carts came to a halt. Phones appeared instantly to capture every perfect angle. "Welcome to your home for the next 4 days," Antonio announced proudly. The villa doors swung open to reveal the grand interior. Soaring ceilings of native wood, curated museum-quality art pieces, and expansive living areas bathed in golden sunlight. I turned to Antonio and spoke with quiet assurance. "Would you mind if I handle the room assignments?" He smiled knowingly and handed me the villa's sleek tablet. "Of course, Miss Caldwell." I tapped through the list with the deliberate calm of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment. "Let's see," I said lightly, knowing full well that every pair of eyes had shifted from the artwork to me. "Julia and Lisa, you'll have the Ocean Master Suites." Their eyes widened. Those were the two finest rooms, typically reserved for royalty and heads of state. They looked around uncertainly, confused as to why I was elevating them above their senior colleagues. They didn't realize I had chosen them for their simple human kindness over the years. They had never joined the office whispers, never participated in the quiet exclusion. "Tyler and Jason, you'll be in the Coral Suites with private plunge pools." I watched their smug relief as they exchanged approving glances. They had no idea I had just assigned them to rooms furthest from the main villa, a deliberate subtlety in the hierarchy of luxury. I worked my way methodically down the list, bypassing certain department heads who had once rolled their eyes when I entered meetings. Those who had treated me with indifference were assigned to comfortable but modest suites tucked near the garden walls. Finally, only Preston remained. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. "And Preston," I paused, savoring the heavy silence, "you'll be in the garden suite." A few of the Brighton team glanced sideways in confusion. They didn't know the garden suite was never designed for executives. It had been intended for accompanying staff. It lacked an ocean view. Its terrace faced the service road behind the villa. Even the linens were simpler. Preston opened his mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. His eyes flickered between me and Antonio, then back to the tablet I still held. He swallowed hard and gave a stiff nod. "Of course. Staff will show you to your accommodations," I said smoothly, closing the tablet and handing it back to Antonio. "Please take time to relax. We'll gather for welcome cocktails on the main terrace at sunset, followed by dinner at 8. The group dispersed hesitantly, many still stealing sidelong glances at me, trying to reconcile the person they had underestimated for so long with the woman who now held absolute control over their experience. As Preston trudged toward the path leading to his modest suite, I walked beside him one final time. He kept his gaze fixed on the ground. I leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "You always said I lacked the polish and sophistication to represent Brighton and Company in a luxury setting." I paused, letting the sound of the ocean fill the space between us. "How's this for polish, Preston?" The faintest flush of red crept up his neck, the only admission of defeat I would ever get. I didn't need more. His humiliation was complete. I turned away and walked confidently back toward the grand villa, the sea breeze lifting the hem of my linen dress as if even the island itself had acknowledged my rightful place, and the best was still to come. The morning sun rose over Caldwell Cove like liquid gold spilling across the waves. I stood barefoot on the polished teak balcony outside my suite, watching pelicans drift lazily above the surf. The faint sound of laughter echoed from the far side of the property as Brighton and Company staff began to explore the grounds. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the calm before the next act. At exactly 8 a.m., I heard the unmistakable sound of Antonio's soft knock. "Miss Caldwell," he murmured through the door. "We have an unexpected visitor." I frowned slightly and stepped inside, pulling a lightweight silk wrap over my shoulders. When I emerged into the villa's grand living room, I froze. Standing near the entrance, surveying the space with quiet authority, was Harrison Caldwell, my father. At 62, he remained an imposing figure, tall, sharply tailored, his silver hair glinting like steel under the soft morning light. His piercing blue eyes flicked over the intricate details of the room with practiced efficiency before settling on me with a warmth reserved only for family. "Good morning, sweetheart," he greeted, pulling me into a quick but firm embrace. I know I promised to stay away, but he smiled slightly. I couldn't resist seeing how Brighton and Company is enjoying our humble accommodations. I laughed under my breath at his casual understatement. I told you I had it handled. I can see that. His eyes twinkled as they took in the luxurious surroundings. You've staged this perfectly. At that moment, voices drifted from outside. The Brighton team had gathered for the scheduled breakfast buffet on the beachside terrace. My father straightened, smoothed the lapel of his linen blazer, and gave me a sly glance. Shall we? We stepped out together onto the terrace. Conversations stopped abruptly. Forks clinked awkwardly against plates. The air changed instantly, like static before a summer storm. Recognition dawned slowly. Harrison Caldwell rarely appeared publicly, preferring anonymity behind his empire. But no photograph could fully capture the sheer command of his presence in person. I watched as colleagues stiffened visibly, their gazes darting between me and him, the realization spreading like wildfire. Preston froze mid-bite, his color draining to a sickly shade of gray. He hastily wiped his mouth, then stood clumsily, extending a hand with a forced smile. Mr. Caldwell, sir, what an unexpected pleasure! My father shook his hand briefly, his own smile thin, not quite reaching his eyes. Fascinating property you have here, Mr. Hawthorne. Preston chuckled nervously. Why, yes, it's truly spectacular. We've been extremely impressed with the attention to detail. Dad's gaze flicked to me, then back to Preston. Though I must apologize for our communication system. I was told the villa's microphones are surprisingly sensitive. Picked up some interesting conversations yesterday. Something about caliber of attendees. Preston blinked. His mouth opened and closed twice, but no sound emerged. A thin sheen of sweat began to form at his temples. I kept my expression carefully neutral, even as I fought the urge to smile. My father was bluffing. Our privacy protocols were ironclad. But Preston didn't know that, and terror flickered unmistakably behind his eyes. Dad turned away smoothly, as if bored already. Well, I'm intruding. Please enjoy your breakfast. He squeezed my shoulder affectionately as he walked back toward the villa. You're running this show, Audrey. I'm just here for the view. As I sat down at the long communal table, I could feel the shift. Where only yesterday I had been the invisible outsider, suddenly chairs were being pulled back for me. Voices softened deferentially as they addressed me directly. Even the most oblivious of my colleagues could no longer deny the truth. Preston, meanwhile, sat rigidly at the far end of the table, barely able to meet anyone's eyes, a hollow shell of the man who had once wielded absolute control. The sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky, casting shimmering reflections across the infinity pool and the glass windows behind us. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the best part of my performance was still to come. The heat of the afternoon sun softened into warm amber as I stood on the quiet stretch of private beach that curved like a crescent beneath the cliffs. Waves rolled in lazily, brushing against the pale sand and retreating with soft whispers. I waited, folder in hand. In the distance, I spotted Preston, standing stiffly at the water's edge, shoulders hunched, eyes staring blankly at the endless horizon. His entire body language screamed defeat. I approached silently, the fine sand shifting under my bare feet. Only when I stood a few feet away did he seem to register my presence. He turned slowly, face pale and drawn, lips pressed into a hard line. Beautiful view, I said softly, joining him to stare at the water. He flinched at the sound of my voice. Yes, he murmured. Beautiful. I extended the folder toward him without ceremony. I believe you should review these. Confused, he took the file and opened it hesitantly. His eyes scanned the neatly organized documentation. Emails, meeting notes, timelines, presentation decks with mysteriously missing credits. Page after page of subtle undermining, reassignments, exclusion tactics, and comments thinly veiled as professional feedback. I watched the color drain from his face with each passing page. His hands began to tremble. I could present this to the board, I said evenly, or file a formal complaint with HR. Both would be devastating for you, and frankly, completely justified. He snapped the folder shut and clutched it tightly against his chest as if it were a grenade. You're going to destroy me, he whispered, his voice raw. No, I shook my head slowly. That was never my intention. He stared at me in disbelief. Then why? Because revenge, as satisfying as it might be in the moment, doesn't build anything lasting. I'm offering you something else, a chance at redemption. His brow furrowed, cautiously hopeful, but clearly not trusting what he was hearing. What do you mean? I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. You will step down from Brighton and Company, quietly, voluntarily. You will recommend a full restructuring of our internal advancement policies. You will support a merit-based promotion system and participate in mandatory leadership training focused on bias and ethics. His eyes widened slightly. And if I refuse? I let the question hang ominously in the air as the breeze stirred my hair. Then the board sees the file, and you won't walk away from this with any dignity left intact. The silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks. Finally, he let out a shuddering breath and nodded, shoulders sagging under the weight of resignation. Why? He asked again, softer this time. After everything I did to you, why offer me a way out? I smiled faintly, gazing out at the line where the sky kissed the sea. Because I want change, Preston. Not just for me, but for every person coming up behind me who deserves better. You've been given a second chance to be part of that change. Don't waste it. He stared at me for a long moment, the full depth of what I had said settling over him. Slowly he nodded again. I'll do it. I offered no handshake, no final word of encouragement. I simply turned and walked back along the beach, the setting sun casting long shadows behind me. Back at the villa, as twilight settled in and soft lantern light illuminated the terrace for our final evening dinner, I looked around the long table at the Brighton team. The conversations were easy, the laughter genuine. For the first time, I belonged without having to shrink myself, without hiding who I was. The true power of this moment wasn't in what I had taken from Preston. It was in what I had reclaimed for myself. The soft glow of torches cast dancing shadows across the white sand as our final dinner unfolded under the stars. Tables were set directly on the beach, linen cloths billowing gently in the breeze. Distant waves played their soothing rhythm as the moon climbed steadily above the horizon. The Brighton team had relaxed noticeably over the past days. The stiff corporate postures had softened into real conversations. Junior staff, once hesitant to speak, now shared ideas openly. Even Tyler and Jason had shown flashes of unexpected humility. I rose slowly from my seat at the head of the table. The soft murmur of conversation fell silent almost instantly. Dozens of expectant faces turned toward me. I took a long breath, my toes sinking slightly into the warm sand, and began. 3 years ago, I walked through the doors of Brighton and Company determined to prove that I could succeed based solely on my work, not my family's name. My gaze swept the crowd. I lived in a small apartment. I drove an aging car. I wore simple clothes. I chose to stand in the shadows because I believed merit would speak for itself. Several people shifted uncomfortably. I continued. What I learned instead is that privilege operates in subtle ways, that the game is often rigged before you ever sit at the table. I had a safety net, whether I admitted it or not, but many people never do. The table was utterly silent. Only the sound of distant waves answered me for a beat. Change starts when we stop playing by broken rules, I said quietly. Effective immediately, Brighton and Company will be implementing new policies to ensure equal opportunities for advancement. Leadership decisions will be made based on merit, not politics or favoritism. We will partner with the newly formed Caldwell Foundation for Business Equity to provide paid internships and mentorship for students who have talent but lack connections. I paused to let the words settle. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with Lisa and Julia at my right, then spread around the table like a ripple across calm water. Some faces showed genuine support. Others clapped because they knew the power dynamic had shifted. Either way, the message had been delivered. 6 months later, I sat in the same office that had once belonged to Preston Hawthorne. The nameplate on the door now read Audrey Caldwell, President and CEO. The sun streamed warmly through the tall glass windows. My office remained simple. Clean lines, no status symbols, no unnecessary extravagance. My clothes were still classic and functional, not because I had to hide anymore, but because I could now choose it as a declaration of who I was. On my desk sat a single piece of coral in a glass display case, a gift from the conservation team we had visited during the retreat. It was a quiet reminder that even fragile things could rebuild and flourish when given the chance. Beside it stood a framed photograph taken just 2 weeks earlier. Me and my father standing proudly with the first class of interns sponsored by the Caldwell Foundation. Young faces, diverse, brilliant, hungry for opportunity, smiled into the camera. The intercom on my desk buzzed gently. My assistant's voice came through. "Your father is on line 1. Something about next year's company retreat." I smiled warmly. Some things had changed dramatically, others not at all. I lifted the receiver and leaned back in my chair, staring out over the same Pacific horizon that had once mocked me and now welcomed me home. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. "I was just thinking about you."